Hello fellow humans and welcome to the Madhouse. I'm Josh and today I want to talk about why it's important to stay informed of current affairs and how I go about doing it. And if you find these tips helpful, great. If you don't, well, I hope you enjoyed this anyway. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you are a human being who lives on planet Earth and that you have access to the internet. So you already have a potential to be more informed than any, well, almost any human beings who have existed through most of history. And yet, there's also a great potential for ignorance in the world, because there is an old axiom that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. And that is true. With social media playing the prominent place it is in today's society, it's so easy for misinformation to be shared and passed around before anything can be verified, in a sort of outrage culture which can lead to some potentially dangerous situations. And this happens across the ideological spectrum, both on the left, right and in the centre. Everyone's guilty of it. It can be difficult to know what is true and what is not, so we have a responsibility to find out more. Truth is important in the world, and being informed also allows us to make more, what's the word I'm looking for? Empowered decisions about how the world should be run around us. Important decisions that determine the future of your local area, your nation, and the planet itself, depending on how you go about these things, must be made from an informed perspective. To do so without is negligence and potentially really quite dangerous. Without being informed, you can be left behind and left out of many of the important discussions of the day. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, is always changing, and you have to be a part of this in order to influence how the decisions are made. If you don't have a say in how they are made, you are bound to be affected by them with no say on how they are going to affect you. And this is not fair for anybody. It started years ago and it's just a habit that I grew into. It's rather healthy. But don't check the news obsessively. If you find yourself getting increasingly anxious about what the news is going to be, don't. Just take a break from it for a while, or maybe just check the news every day once, or every other day. Just obviously take care of your mental health first, but don't allow that to feed into ignorance. Like most people of my generation, I don't use print newspapers. I get all of my news online, and for the most part from my smartphone. Not everybody has these, but any electronic device that can connect to the internet would work. I just find smartphones handy because most of them have an app which you can use to collate news from the various sources that you want. I realised that until recently I was getting my news from really only a couple of sources, and they were not particularly ideologically varied. I am quite left-wing, and so are most of the places I got my news. And there's nothing wrong with getting your news from left-wing sources that you happen to trust more than some. But you should also look for some more right-wing sources to try and balance it out, and also to look for balanced sources that don't pump an ideology into this. Because they're human beings, nothing will be ever truly free of bias, but you can find better things. Things that avoid as much bias as, well, humanly possible. I use, at the moment, Google Newsstand to compile dozens of newspapers and magazines in one place for me to get my news from. It gives me notifications when important or trending stories happen, so if it turns out that a nuclear weapon has been fired, I will get a notification to tell me that, for example, North Korea has fired nuclear weapons at China and we are all about to die. And it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. I've also set it to give me a notification if there are any more updates on the Fantastic Beasts films. It doesn't have to be about darkness, it should be about what interests you, but also about, and I know this may be a word that you don't like that much, politics. Because it is a part of your everyday life. You may not think that what happens in Parliament or Congress is that important to you, but then If you think about it, if you're a student, you probably care about student loans. If you have a job, you probably care about how much tax you're going to pay. If you have a pension, you probably care about what the pension policies are of the current government. If you're a mortal human being like me, you probably care about the state of the health system in your country. All of these are vitally important and play a massive part in everybody's lives, and they don't necessarily realise it's political. Some of the things you may think shouldn't be political, but this is the world we live in. What we want to happen isn't that important until we work ourselves to make that happen. And information is the best way to do this, or the best way to start doing this. My three favourite sources of news at the moment are the BBC, The Guardian and Reuters. The BBC and Reuters are some of the largest journalistic organisations in the world. The BBC is the largest. Both are sworn to truth. Now, of course, they have had slip-ups, and I'm sure they're not perfect all the time, but for the most part, they seem to be pretty good. The BBC especially. It tries to be independent and rigorous in its journalism. In fact, its commitment to journalistic integrity is renowned across the entire world, although not by the current President of the United States. The Guardian, however, I quite like their opinion pieces because, I don't agree with all of them, far from it, but they are often along similar lines to my own beliefs, so they challenge me and lead me to develop my own ideas further than they are at the moment, but without making me angry at significant disagreements over moral issues that I feel very, very strongly about. Say, they don't tend to tell me that gay people should go burn in hell just for existing, like some news organisations. Now, this does sound quite UK-centric, and in some ways it is, though the BBC and Reuters do have quite an international presence. My news intake is very British, because so am I. So I've also made some attempts to branch out further and get some more European news and some news from further around the world. For German news, I use Deutsche Welle and a YouTube channel I believe is called Tagesschau. Deutsche Welle is, as far as I can tell, a pretty good organisation in terms of news, and Tagesschau, on their channel, they upload quite regularly half-hour current affairs programs, usually daily, which offer news, analysis and vocab to help me increase my ability in German. There's also the Social Europe Journal for things beyond Germany. I focus mostly on Germany because I read German better than the other languages, okay? My French is not as good as it used to be, and I find trying to read Dutch to be a painful experience after a while because it looks like dyslexic German. For our friends and cousins across the pond, I try to have as many sources as I can as well. There is the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, and I also use the UK one of those because it's quite handy. And I use the UK Times as well. There's also the Young Turks, which I both read and watch because I find the YouTube channel to be both entertaining and informative, and they often offer some quite interesting analysis of American stories that I simply would not have known about just from reading the New York Times and the like. They often do some more obscure stuff as far as I can tell, though of course it might be fairly common knowledge to any American. I'm not. For when I want to be more informed in terms of science, I read The New Scientist and Focus magazine, and they're very helpful for information on environmental affairs. I also go to Greenpeace, which can be very helpful. Obviously, they have a political agenda which is blatant. They don't bother to hide it. But they... Of course, almost all of those sources are quite left-wing or centrist, because that's what interests me most of the time. But of course I know that only having access to news from people who share the same beliefs as yourself just leads to a very narrow worldview, and you rarely know anything outside this. So I want to have a look at some more right-wing things. I occasionally read things from the Daily Mail and the Sun, but they are often quite painful in how they are written. There seems to be a very limited approach to the dictionary in such publications. It's quite disappointing. And I have been looking for right-wing sources in the US, but I have to say the American definition of right-wing seems a lot closer to what I would call fascist in this country. Trying to look at Fox News seems almost entirely like propaganda, and Breitbart is just too dark for me. So if there are any right-wing publications in the US which are not outright propaganda and seemingly quite well written, because I hate it when I have to go in and correct the spellings as I go along. It bothers me. And I would be happy to hear your recommendations. I know this is quite limited to the Western world, so if you can recommend any news particularly in tune to Africa, the Middle East and Asia, this would be very helpful, because of course I have very few sources here. The BBC and Reuters do tend to give me some information from here, but it's not detailed enough for me. So that's it. I hope this wasn't too rambly, because I've been talking for nearly half an hour and I'm still not sure if I'm anywhere near done, but my neck hurts and I'm hungry, so I'm going anyway. I hope you have enjoyed this and found it informative or entertaining in and of itself. If you were looking for recommendations, I'm glad I could have helped you. And if you weren't, then, well, happy Tuesday. This is going up on a Friday, but happy Tuesday anyway, because it's like when people say Merry Christmas before Christmas Day. This is a thing I do, but I've never really said it online before. Oh, and of course, as I say every time, if you did enjoy this, please click like, share, and if you haven't already, subscribe. And of course, comment down below giving me recommendations and your thoughts on whether or not we should stay informed, why, and all of that stuff. I look forward to it. Until next time, Tatty Vise.
Ohne dich hat der Regen keine Tropfen. Ohne dich hat das Meer keine Flut. Ohne dich hat der Berg keinen Gipfel. Ohne dich ist mein Herz ohne Glut.